a bit about what he's been doing. So James is a youth worker, but was an employed youth worker with the church, and then left that post, but has started his own mentoring ministry since that. So we wanted James to sort of share a bit about, if you're almost most time is doing mentoring and encouraging mentoring, what's your sort of learning? So James is going to share a chunk of time with us for that. Then I thought we'd look at some of the big questions of sort of mentoring, maybe some of the harder ones, and go sort of chat to them a little bit, and then go into breakout rooms to talk about some of those struggles and maybe pray for one another. And then Alex, Alex Stoney, you'll see in the corner there, is our 267 intern, and she's going to share what it's like to be mentored, but Alex also is mentoring another younger person. So Alex is in her sort of intern year, 18, 19 year, but she's mentoring one of our other young people. And part of me, my heart of mentoring is that we are mentoring our young people, but also then telling them to go and find someone else to almost pass that mentoring on. So Alex is just going to share that sort of story. And then I'm just going to share a couple of thoughts that will probably be really familiar to us of just Jesus's style of mentoring. And then I thought we'd finish. So I'm aiming at about an hour and a quarter, but if we get carried away and you need to go, I'm almost saying 2:30 will be, I'll cut the video, but the plan is we'll aim for that. Is that okay with everyone? Smashing. But if you need to, cut your camera off to go and make a coffee or go to the loo, then you can pick up on any of the recording afterwards. Or if you've got a mojito like Joel, you might need to top it up. That did look a bit fancy, Joel. I love that. Wow. That's like you've been doing.
It's just squash. It's just got a slice of lemon in it and some fresh basil.
What? So half and done. I love that. It's so half and done. Excellent. Let me pray for us, and then we'll go around and just intro, and then we can sort of just split in two and just chat about our experience of mentoring. So let me just pray. Dear God, thank you I just want to thank you for the call on each of our lives, that you have called us to serve people. You've called us to do life with people and walk with people. And that is sometimes, if not all the time, messy and far from straightforward. But if we look at you and having to work with the disciples and everybody else, it was never a straightforward journey. So would you just bless us with some encouragement from being together, sharing stories, sharing things that have gone well and not gone well, and will we just be encouraged by being in each other's company? We long for the day we could do this over a table with a meal, and that day is coming soon. But would you just really use this time now? And we thank you for almost the benefit of something like Zoom, that we can meet together from all our different places. So be present, God, and thank you for each of our lives and callings and ministries. Amen. So I'll go first, and then you just got to shout in, because I realise if I go around my screen, your screen might look different. So literally, so my name's Mike. Most of you know me. So I'm sorry if that's a negative, but I was a youth worker for a bunch of years in a church, and then went to America to do youth work. I had the strange scenario of flying to America on 9/11, the week of 9/11. So I spent 3 months in America as that country was navigating a lot of faith-based questions. And so I learned a lot about the Americans' love of relational youth work, of investing in people, not programs, which was really helpful. And then when I came back, I did a bit more youth work, and then sort of conjured up the idea of 267, which is a charity that exists to simply encourage other youth work and other kids ministry by either resources or gathering events, or just taking leaders out for breakfast, which is probably my favorite thing. And we are in our 14th year, and what started off as one is now a team of 6, and God has been very good. And so, yes, the biggest thing I'm probably missing is being able to absolutely destroy my hospitality budget by taking people out for brunch. So I've warned the trustees, come May 21st, the treasurer is going to be busy, because I'm taking everyone out. That's an open invite. that's me. Somebody else go next.
I'm Terry, and I've known Mike since he started the 267 ministry, and I'm appalled to know that it's 14 years, Mike. I'm sorry. Who knew? I go to St. Paul's Church. I hang out with the youth because they let me, mostly. And I work for STEP, Schools Work Charity. So my job is to organise volunteers. I'm here in my capacity as St. Paul's and looking at what on earth do we do after this? And met Rachel last night. You can go next, Rachel. I've just landed you in it.
I'll go next. Thank you. Hi guys, I am Rachel Alexander. I am the new youth pastor at St. Paul's, which is really exciting. So as I said earlier, I'm on my 3rd day, and I just got out of a 2-hour safeguarding online Zoom meeting. So that was fun. I'm sure we've all been there. So sorry if I'm a little bit out of it. I'm a little bit zoomed out, but I will try my best to be present. So yeah, I'm just really excited. I've had a bit of time in South Africa as a youth pastor, and then I spent a bit of time in London at Anglican Church there, and I've just moved to Luton, and so I live in Luton, but I'll be working in St. Albans. Yeah, that's me. Shall I nominate someone? Alex.
Yes.
Alex, open to you.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm 18. I'm the current intern at 267. So I guess that's the main mentoring thing for me. But I'm currently on a gap year. I also work part-time at a restaurant in St. Albans. And I love food and people. Claire, you're next.
Hi, I'm Claire. I'm another member of the 267 team. Well, domination. I am the project youth worker, but I also head up Haven, which is our ministry for teenagers who are struggling with anxiety and other mental health issues. And I love mentoring. I absolutely love it. And I'm also a coach, which is slightly different to mentoring. But it's one of my favorite ways to work with people, is to give them space to think and help them to think things through. So I am going to nominate Lizzie.
Hey, I'm Lizzie. I'm currently not working at the moment. I was previously working for a church in Chorleywood area for 5 years. And currently just working out what the next season of life looks like. But I'm also currently doing some mentoring in schools at the moment. So yeah, it's good to still be in touch with young people, but in a different context. So yeah, that's been fun. I nominate Becky.
Hiya, my name is Becky Lawrence. I am from Luton, but currently living and working in Milton Keynes. I work for a church here in Milton Keynes called St Mark's as youth and children's worker, and then I also last January started a new ministry called Youth Work Plus, which supports youth and children's ministry in Milton Keynes and beyond. So we've got a website, and we do networking and consultancy and training and all sorts of stuff. But I was a mentor when I was in Luton for 10 years with Greenhouse Mentoring, which is a youth mentoring project there. So yeah. Who hasn't been? I nominate Faye.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Faye. I'm a youth and family worker at a United Reformed Church in St Albans. I haven't done much mentoring, but it is something that I would really like to get into. And this week I qualified as a mental health first aid trainer. So I'm going to be doing mental health first aid as well in my current role, and my new role, which I start in April as well, which I'm quite excited about. I nominate James.
Hi guys, my name is James. I worked for High Street Methodist Church in Harpenden for about 7 years total, including like volunteering and interning and things like that. And there I actually met Joel, who we actually did a kind of internship volunteer thing together. there was a post on Facebook where it was like 6 years ago you all did this, and me and Joel went on a away day with 267, actually, funny enough. Yeah, so I left the church for just personal reasons, needed to kind of focus on me for a bit, and then kind of heard how the churches in the area weren't meeting up with their youth, and had a lot of kind of disappointment. I was like, I got to start something. So like got the DBS checks and all that kind of stuff through, and I was like, let's just start something to kind of, just to keep walking out the calling God's put on my life to be a youth leader. And I love it, and it's awesome. So yeah, that's me. I nominate Joel, who's just finishing his sandwich, I think.
Hello, I'm Joel. I'm a person mainly. I've started doing the youth work with James, as he said, years and years ago. Then I went to uni, and now I've come back basically. So I'm kind of like, I sort of picked back up with the Methodist Church to, carry on with the youth volunteering. So I'm a volunteer still, so just doing a bit of that, and then now I'm doing a bit of work with STEP. But other than that, I'm a freelance multimedia guy, so I do graphics design and video editing and stuff like that. I actually do a bit of that work with the Methodist Church as well. And I'm also working part-time at a pub, which still on furlough at the moment, so that's all right. So I think that's me. Yeah.
I think it's just Matthew to go.
I nominate Matthew then.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I'm Matt. I'm from Woodstock, which is Oxfordshire way, Blenheim Palace, if you know that. So I trained in youth work with Rain Ministries more years ago than I'd like to admit. And kind of after that, felt a calling to go into my hometown, which is Woodstock, and set up an ecumenical youth work trust. So I set that up between the churches and the school, with discipleship focus, which, reading between the lines, sounds like when you say mentoring, that's why I picture discipleship. So I think that's singing from the same hymn sheet. And I've also started in September a chaplaincy role at the local secondary school, which has been really exciting, very different, but exciting, and starting to do a bit of more like mentoring stuff through that. And then through my networks, I know Ollie Shaw, who said, I've got some friends who asked me to promote this, so here's this. And I thought, cool, I'm free then, I'll go along and see what people have got to say. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Matt. That's good. Say hi to Ollie when you see him. He's, I like Ollie. Just to let you know, because STEP's been mentioned a couple of times, for those that don't know, it's quite helpful to have that understanding. So STEP is a schools work organisation in the sort of St Albans and Harpenden area. It's been going for about 30 years. And they're in, tell me if I'm up, 15 of the 17 secondary schools, is that about right? And so they do a lot of informal and formal youth work. And so, yeah, they're quite, so whenever people mention they have a lot of volunteers and team, obviously less so in the last 12 months, but hopefully more so in the coming 12. So whenever anyone mentions STEP, that just sort of, it's a really significant piece of ministry in the sort of area where we live that has had abundant fruit, and I'm very thankful that we live quite near them, which is great.
We're very grateful for 267 too, because you've been able to sort for us. We've worked quite well together.
Yeah, it's quite. Yeah, our first trustees used to call us symbiotic, and then I said, "Can you use a word I know what means, please?" That'd be great. So we work well together. It's great. So just before we sort of go into two rooms and just find out what our experiences are, I want it to be okay for people to say what their sort of understanding of mentoring is in terms of what you do, because I think you probably get some people who mentor in a very structural way. So some of the resources that you can have are very structural. So you structure meetings and the sort of pattern of the conversation, and you work through different sort of themes and stuff like that. And then probably at the other spectrum, you've got probably maybe a bit what Matt was talking about, a sort of more discipleship role. And so I think everything is okay, but I think it's worth us being okay with the fact that me taking someone out for coffee every couple of weeks is still mentoring, but might be different to the mentoring where you're having a really structural, tactical sort of plan of where you want to take someone. And I think both are valid, but it's really good, I think, when we talk about mentoring, is to think actually the young person I'm meeting or the leader I'm meeting, what do they want to get out of this relationship? Because that will shape what you do. Because for some of them, the doing life together and just having someone to talk to, a safe space, is maybe for this season is exactly what they need. Somebody else might need someone to really help take them through steps of going to uni, moving home, all those sort of things, wrestling with faith, and that is a very different animal. So be fine with whatever your understanding of mentoring is. Because I come from, I'm not trained in anything. You know, I've got my 10-meter swimming badge and my cycling proficiency, and I've got a Blue Peter badge. That is my CV. All I've done is that God called me however many years ago, and I've tried to just do what he said. Now, that may have been, I should have listened more and got some actual learning, but I didn't. So some people might have actually been trained in mentoring, like Claire was talking about coaching. She's been trained in that. And that's really good to bring that to the table, because if you're like me, I'm always wanting to discover new things. So Alex, send us into a couple of rooms and we'll have maybe 8-10 minutes just finding out. Now, I'm sorry we didn't have Alex in the room there. It's his flaw in great technology.
I was just watching over everyone, like, I can see what you're doing.
Well, you can see both rooms while we're in the rooms.
No. I can just see names of the people that are in each room.
Because that was almost like creepy stalker voyeurism type. Well, wasn't it? You were doing that. Now, if we were in a room together, I was just telling the guys I was sharing a room with that we'd get someone to feed back almost the highlights. I think it'd be really good for just two people to feed back, one from each of the two groups. Just maybe some of the things that has just sort of stuck in your head going, oh, that's really interesting. Just so that we can almost have a sneak peek into what the other room did. But also, that'll really help Alex see what went on. And then the people who listen afterwards will get to hear a little bit about what went on in the breakout room. So who would like to share a bit what went on in our room? If no one happily volunteers, I'll nominate Terry, or then I'll do it myself. Unless anyone wants to do it. Oh, don't let me do it. I means I have to remember things.
Oh my goodness, you guys, you're terrible. I'll get nominated. Go on, I'll do it.
Thanks, Terry.
We were talking about as Mike said before we went into the room, the broadest spectrum of what everything included. And it can be as simple as having a cup of coffee and following up on what you did last week, having a set of questions that don't prescript what you do, but frame what you ask to give space. We talked a little bit about the difference between mentoring in faith and mentoring not in faith, but in school, and how that can stretch you and be quite a challenge. And we mentioned a little bit about the benefits being as old as me and having a mentor to tell you what to do. Of course, not everybody's prepared to do that. Anything that I missed, you lot? Did you?
I think the one thing, Matt said something which I wrote down, which I know should be an obvious thing to me, but asking a young person, what's God been sharing with them, what's telling them? And I thought that's something that I should have been thinking about, but it is really cool, isn't it? So actually, what is God wanting to speak through the young people that move with? But also, what is God telling you? What are you reading and stuff like that? And that was really helpful to almost have that as part of the key conversation that we're talking about, is that actually we don't just want to almost shepherd them in the sort of dullest sense. We want them to say, actually, what is God telling you? Because then we want to then make sure that gets heard. We want to amplify that wisdom that God speaks through them. And I think the other thing, just so Terry doesn't have to embarrass herself by talking about what I said, was it's only in the last few years I've realized the benefit of having a mentor myself, which I should have done decades before. But having two guys that I walk with, one who probably the majority of the time is speaking into my professional walk, and then another guy who's speaking into predominantly my sort of personal walk. And there's been crossover, obviously, but one of them God has clearly given to me as a very alpha male who still asks me how I'm feeling, which is massively refreshing. But then a guy who is doing ministry in a similar environment gets to ask me questions about how I lead, how I grow, what am I excited about, how am I going to achieve the ministry's goals. And so I think if I'd have discovered the benefits of having, almost for God to get rid of my ego 20 years ago rather than just a couple of years ago, would have been really helpful. So that was just a really helpful, almost a helpful thing to say out loud actually to people, because I'm starting to realize even now, yeah, that's so beneficial to my current journey in ministry. So I'm thankful for those two guys. The other, when I say the other, I don't mean lesser, I just mean the other group. Claire looks like she's going to lead.
I was going to say, any volunteers?
I nominate Claire.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so we went around and we shared the variety of experience that we've had, which was actually quite a broad spectrum of experience of mentoring in different capacities and being mentored, and different ways of mentoring. And we touched on, you know, some of the different dynamics of different ages as well. You know, the fact that different ages might need different things from mentoring. I shared a bit about the coaching and how that differs to mentoring, that just having that more formal framework, and whereas mentoring, it's more about sort of guidance and, you know, advice, but in the nicest and loosest possible way. But whereas coaching, it's all about creating space for the other person to think. And then we talked about some of the challenges and some of the sort of the ways that we manage boundaries, and how important it is to have some of those sort of structures in place just to help kind of protect both ourselves and the person that we're mentoring. And then likewise, we just came on to actually the importance of having mentors ourselves. So yeah.
Awesome. That was great to get that for the recording, because people can know what we're chatting about. And now, James, we're going to lovingly allow James to take us for 10 minutes or so, just to share a bit about his story, his journey, but also why he utterly loves, but also realizes the importance of mentoring. James, we're all yours, sir. Do ask us questions, chat box questions if we need to, or just take us through, bud. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, pal. I really appreciate it for Mike inviting me. It came from just a discussion where, just talking about mentorship, and it was like, we should do something on this. And really we're like, yeah, all right, let's go. So I shared with the other group, I always just get super nervous, generally. I really don't like Zoom calls. I think they're so strange. So I just want to put that out there. I'm looking at a different screen with my notes on, so my camera's here, so just apologizing. So I'm paying attention. But yeah, really, I just really wanted to share kind of my thoughts behind mentorship and discipleship, and what does that even mean? Biblically, where do we go with discipleship and mentorship? And so I got a bunch of notes. So I'm really just going to speak, and hopefully after it will get your brains working to then just kind of discuss it after. So really just starting, good old Matthew 28, the Great Commission. I'll just read it out for those who can't remember it, etc. Then Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and surely I am always with you to the very end of the age. And really, discipleship, I would personally say, mentorship is just doing life with people. Jesus lived his life And out of 12 of his disciples, only one betrayed him. Well, two, but he repented. And Jesus did life with people, and he was walking around a desert for 3 years, spending time with his bros and really just hanging out and doing life and challenging them, and having real life opportunities together. And I think that's why discipleship and mentoring is so important, because it isn't, and I'll get onto this later, I think it's very obvious that it's tied in with God's mission, the Great Commission, the co-mission that we have to do life with God in making disciples, really. There's this author, his name is Bosch. It's quite funny because that's like name of like appliances and stuff. But he makes this argument that making disciples is firstly the most important thing. And then after that, baptizing, etc. Because actually through being a disciple, which is different than a follower, you're going to start to know how to live life like Jesus did. So what's our job in mentoring young people today? And I think kind of quickly going through a little history lesson, I'll be as quick as I can, just kind of thinking of where these young people are at already. So obviously the UK became a Christian nation in like the 6th or 7th century, and Christendom kind of came about where everyone was a Christian, people were baptized into the church, so you're Christian. But it was somewhat of a problem, and quoting my lecturer, where because they jettisoned discipleship, they lowered the standards, and they really just had cheap grace, because then everyone's a Christian and no one's a disciple. And I do think there is a difference between the two. And we all know the people who, and maybe some in this room, that's fine, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. Oh, what church you go to? Oh yeah, this one, but only on Easter and Christmas. And you're like, wait, what? That's not a disciple. Because actually that's just a get out of jail free card. So the generation today, Gen Z, have had this experience. The kind of the people who have brought them up are either Christians or they're not. And obviously there's the few here and there who are Christians, right? So that generation is known as the generation of the nuns, N-O-N, not U-N, where they didn't have any faith at all, but really kind of looking at as well where Christendom kind of fizzled out, I guess, after World War I and during, because people were starting to question it. And obviously there were peaks, where people actually, there were big spikes after World War II and things like that. But ultimately, the generation of the nuns, they didn't really have much faith. I'm not too sure of the stats. But then the one before them kind of forced them to go to church, and it kind of all went from there. I think the generation that we're trying to disciple now have this idea of Christianity, of it just being a tradition, of it being the place you go for church. But ultimately, we've got the opportunity and really the responsibility to invite them into that mission, because ultimately it's an opportunity to co-create with the creator of the universe, to join in what he's doing. The whole idea of like Missio Dei, where God's already doing a mission and he's sending us to join in that mission with these young people. But looking at kind of today, and as well, just using the Gen Z book by James Emery White, sorry. If you haven't read it, read it, because it's just phenomenal and it will get you in the head of young people. So they are very much believing in spirituality, not religion, where they believe in ghosts and heaven and hell, but not Jesus, because they don't, they've had this terrible example broadly of actually being a Christian is judgmental, and it's going to church on these days and, got to be quiet and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, Jesus is the God of the supernatural and the God of the miracles. So we need to kind of get to this point of how do we share that with them, that if they are a generation that focuses on the supernatural, how can we show them that Christ is that? But before we get there, like random facts about Gen Z, they've always had a supercomputer in their pocket. Their attention span, which dropped from 12 seconds in 2000, is now an average of 8.25 seconds, which is actually less than a goldfish, just to let you know. So social media is very much focused on imagery and Instagram, and you just see them scrolling all the time. It's all about pictures. So pictures speak 1,000 words. it's this thing Emery Wright says about the curse of knowledge, about because they've got a supercomputer in their pocket, they think they know everything all the time, which is fine, you know, they grow up. But actually, it isn't just about teaching them anymore. It's about teaching them how to interpret information now, because they know everything. And so how do they interpret the information that they actually come across? Yeah, it's like everything's on YouTube. You can learn how to put a car back together just by watching a YouTube video, so stuff like that. It's a culture of offense. If you don't agree with them, then you can't be friends, which is quite interesting. They're post 9/11, which is a really weird and interesting thought, that they've always been in this kind of war on terror, as people say. Some of them maybe never have licked a postage stamp, that they've grown up with Harry Potter and Modern Family as like their kind of watching in their era. They've been recession marked. Email has always been used for connecting, and now like Snapchat and Instagram and things like that. They're sexually fluid a lot more. They're a lot more multicultural. The average age of viewing porn is 14, which this was back in 2017, I think it was. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's much younger, if I'm honest. And now they're like the COVID generation as well. So all this information, there's all this stuff. I've not really had it too easy. Yeah, there's this quote by Einstein: insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And actually, when it comes to mentorship and discipleship, if the aim is let's get them to Jesus, and maybe it's not, it's depending on what, depending on what you're mentoring or discipling in them, is ultimately like, if we're still doing the same thing, which is let's go to church 1 hour a week, every week, then actually they're probably not going to become a Christian. So like, people very much think evangelism is an event such as Soul Survivor or the big old Billy Graham crusades, where my wife actually became a Christian at, which is an interesting fact. But youth start in year 7, they finish in year 13. So we've got 7 years, if we're lucky, to be able to invest into their lives. Maybe sooner if you know them at church and stuff like that. But maybe we see them once or twice a week, right? So not many hours. From the start of school, actually, this will be fun. If you want to raise your hands or be brave. At the start of school, guess how many hours young people spend at school until 18? So when they start until 18, has anyone got any rough guesses?
So is that from like reception 4 or 5 years old, James?
Yeah, until 18. What are some
hours?
You can just guess it. Unless you're bang on, then well done.
Are we going to put this in the chat box? Should we do that?
If you want, or you can yell it, it's fine. Just like a 5-second thing, instead of hearing my voice constantly.
Oh, I didn't send it to everyone.
Ah. What do you think, Mike?
40,000.
40,000. Oof. Anyone think higher or lower?
All right, Bruce.
No. Okay. So it's just under 18,000 hours.
Wow.
Right. But if you think about it, compared to church, which let's say 2 hours a week, right? Maybe there's a few here and there. In the same time frame, really, it's only like just under 2,000 hours. So we're thinking of how do we influence these young people? How do we disciple them when actually we've only got 1 or 2 hours with them a week? And with evangelism and discipleship not just being an event, but it's a process. So we've got all these years to spend with them. I remember when I first met with 267 people, they were saying how the average time of a youth worker at a church was like a year. And then I heard someone recently say now it's like 9 months, and I'm like, what? That's just mental. And that actually you can't disciple, you can't make disciples within that time frame. All you're doing is like crisis management. And actually it isn't. We're not joining churches or things to be crisis managers, but we're actually trying to disciple and invite young people into the kingdom, I guess. But ultimately we've got to make this process of discipleship, of evangelism, of mentorship fun. It's got to be the best night of their week. That's why we do Friday night clubs, or Friday night Zooms now, I guess, or that's why we do Fuel or Excite for the younger kids. Youth alphas, we do these exciting things to get them to get to know who God is. but also young people crave community. And a lot of the times young people come to these events, or they want to be discipled or come to these groups because their friends are going. And normally God isn't at the top of their list, and that's okay. And we've got to be okay with that being okay. Maybe the top is because there's a cute girl that goes and that he wants to go and see that girl. But actually, they're going to see their friends, and God might not be their top priority. But through the community, through question, through vulnerability, or through their tribe, I guess, they can come to kind of know together. And being discipled in a group and getting to know that group and in that community, and then having people, I think Alex is speaking on this later, then having the older youth mentoring the younger youth, because they're all on the same Jesus journey, you know, is just as powerful and probably more powerful than actually us trying to mentor them, you know. I think it's Jesus mentored people, so should we. He discipled. They were called the disciples, you know, so we should get on that. But it's quite interesting how it's really, people didn't really think about discipleship until like the 50s, because people didn't really think about discipleship in the 50s, and there's always been this been a huge boom from like the 80s onwards of like these discipleship books coming out, because actually it's so much more about just being a Christian, but it's being a disciple, and that's when you're following him, doing life, and it's all about trying to help young people get that and understand that, where it isn't the boring Christianity that they think or have experienced, but actually it's joining in with the kingdom of what God is doing, joining in and co-creating with him, and actually it's just doing life with people. And sometimes that's going to be having super deep chats, and sometimes it might just be just spending time with them, having a coffee, catching up. And I think there's different discipleship relationships and things like that, but yeah, so that's kind of my general thoughts. I do just wonder, I don't know if we've got time to ask if there's anything that stood out to people, but just to kind of create a conversation. Would that be all right, Mike? To kind of
I thought we'd do that in our two groups, James. Is that all right?
Cool, yeah.
All right. So yeah. We'll go together. And what I've done is, if James has sort of prompted a thought, talk about that. But if you need if you need a question, I'm going to put 4 questions in the chat, and you can just pick one of those to sort of wrestle through, and then maybe some of the things that James spoke about, you know, we'll really speak into some of these, because I've put in 4 maybe slightly sort of more difficult questions, shall we say, for us to think about, not just why is mentoring great. I think we'll all agree mentoring is important, but actually, so my 4 questions, so you can start thinking about them, is what to do when it isn't working. So what do you do when mentoring isn't working, as in if you've started it? How do you finish well? So how do you end mentoring? How do you measure success with mentoring? And then who should you mentor, but also who should you not mentor? Okay, I thought there'd be 4 questions. And so Alex, if we have 8 minutes, is that all right? And then we'll just go on in your appraisal. Now, Alex Stoney.
Yes.
Is don't really want to call you a young person anymore. Not because you are old. Tell journey of mentoring.
So I was kind of thinking about this while you guys were in breakout rooms, and I was kind of just sat here on my own. But yeah, I've sort of got an experience of mentoring from a few perspectives. So both mentoring someone and being mentored started during COVID and started when I became an intern for the 267. And what I absolutely love about being mentored was the wisdom and the experience that came from someone that was a little bit further on in their journey with God. Also brought a different perspective, which I think is always healthy, to have someone that's not exactly like you. And another thing that I really love about being mentored is sort of that impartiality, that someone that isn't necessarily the closest person to me is now speaking into my life, which I think is really good, because otherwise you just get this echo chamber of your own thoughts, which I think it's nice to have some differentiation. Mentoring a young person also started for COVID, during COVID. And that was the first time that I've ever mentored a young person. So I really had to sit with God on that one and think, I don't just want to pick someone that I'm comfortable with. Like, I want that to be led by God. I remember a couple of weeks before I met the girl that I was mentoring, I wrote out a little paragraph to myself, like, you need to memorize this and you need to say this before you start anything. And that was a disclaimer that, like, I'm not perfect. I am not finished with my journey with God. I've really, really stuffed up before. But there's also not very much that you can say that is going to shock me or horrify me or make me not like you. So I think just having those points that I brought straight away really established this connection between me and the person that I was mentoring. What else did I write? Yes, so the disclaimer was also that I wasn't solving their problems, but I was walking with them through their problems, because I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a social services worker. So if there are some things that come up, I'm only 18, and I made that very clear that there are some things that you're going to be dealing with that I've never dealt with, but I can speak into it from a spiritual perspective, and I can pray with you, and I can sort of be that, I don't know, helping hand, but not the one thing that's going to hold you up during this. And a little bit on other things that have, like, other things to do with mentorship and discipleship that have been really important for me was worship mentoring. So I started worship leading when I was 14, which is quite a young age to be leading a congregation in worship. So obviously, well, when I was 14, I was a year into being Christian. So it sort of all started happening at once. But that was a very different dynamic that I found really, really helped me, like, become the person I am today. Because now I worship with a congregation, but I don't know, it's got that backing that sort of came from being mentored. And yeah, so, like, the sort of fourth thing that I wanted to briefly touch on was my experience of being mentored while on mission. So in 2019, I went to Uganda for a couple of weeks, and I was mentored during those 2 weeks. So we knew it was a short-term thing, but it was almost mentoring with an agenda, and we knew what we were sort of talking for and what we were talking about, which was also really handy. And I think the agenda needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, I think, because obviously if you're mentoring someone, you don't want to go with your own, I don't know, priorities and your own agenda. Sometimes you need to do that, like, put those aside and do it with God's agenda and God's will. But it was very nice to know sort of the plan for the 2 weeks, like where this mentoring was going. But yeah, I think that's all I really need to say.
That's amazing, Alex. See, that's why you should work for 267 for longer, because we need that voice in our lives. I think the two things that were really, two things that I wrote down, two things as you, but I think the one I hadn't really twigged on, which really hit me a bit, was not being the sole responsibility for keeping this person almost alive and well, which I think that can feel like it if you're mentoring a young person who's maybe carrying some stuff or having a really tricky time. It can feel like you're the only person, or they might think you're the only person that can do it, and it's just not healthy. But also, it's just quite a lot of pressure, isn't it? So that's really helpful to manage that and encourage them to have other support structures, as well as you having someone that you can have a support structure. Which is why I always say, whenever you're mentoring, you've got to have a mentor. And the other thing was of that really just so wonderful thing of not coming from a place of having this sorted, and that's just such a great start point for all of us, isn't it? That we don't want to go into this mentoring because we've got a t-shirt that says I am fine and sorted, so therefore I can fix everyone else. It's actually, we're all a little bit messed up, and we're just doing a journey together. We may just have got it wrong a few more times, so therefore we can help somebody not make the same mistakes maybe. Just to finish, I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts, if that's okay, and then people can either share anything before we finish or just go. So I just spent the morning, or a bit of the morning, while my boy was painting this morning. I walked through one of the Gospels really lightly and watched how Jesus interacted with the disciples. So not everyone, not how he interacted, but how he interacted with the disciples. Now, John might not have been the best book for that, but I chose John because I don't know John, or I don't go to John as often as maybe I go to Mark and Luke. And I thought, actually, I want God to catch me out a little bit, and he did, which was great. So I just want to take you through a few verses of just things that automatically either provoked a mentoring thought in me, or encouraged me, or gave me a little tip. So I started at John 1:38, where the disciples come to Jesus because of who he is, and Jesus asked them, "What do you want?" And I just thought, first of all, it came across as quite rude. It's almost like Jesus going, "What do you lot want?" When actually, how great a question is that? And we talked about it briefly, didn't we? Is to say to our young people, what do you want? What do you want out of this? Because actually, it's really important we value and honor each other's time. You know, it's actually, the disciples came to Jesus, and Jesus said, "Okay, if you want to follow me, what do you want?" And then he goes through in verse 43. He says, "Follow me." There is this sort of physicalness to the idea of following, that you will be an example to them. But also it says, actually, we're physically going to do this together. I'm going to walk with you. And so we need to be aware of the example that we are. And so Jesus is saying, actually, I want you to maybe live life with me a little bit. So I'm a big fan of opening up the people that I mentor to my family, you know, to the journey, because that is really important. And then Jesus, you know, we know some of these stories. He goes on retreat with them. He says they went out and spent the day in the Judean countryside. We've all done retreats. It's really important, isn't it? That actually, we said earlier, we go away with kids, we go away with leaders, because we need to slightly disarm our brains from the regularity and the order and the everydayness. And when we sometimes trick our brains into a little bit to breathing and stopping, God can really break in. And sometimes that needs to be a different physical environment. Then we get the feeding of the 5,000, probably one of my favorite stories, because what happens? We all know it. Jesus goes, "You give them something to eat." And so the disciples sitting there going, what? No, you're the miracle person. Why are you asking me? But actually, how important is it that we involve young people in helping them solve their problem? We don't want to be feeding them and saying, "Yeah, I'll do it all for you." It was a challenge to them, to ask them, how are we going to do this? You know, this sort of teaching in action was a great mentoring strategy from Jesus. He didn't just say, "Watch me, I'll show you what I do." It was actually, what are you going to do about it? In John 6, he says this great phrase. He says, when he walks on the water to them, he says, "It is I, do not be afraid." And I just thought, actually, mentoring gives us a great position of care. You know, we want to care for these young people, because a lot of them might be massively vulnerable. So when Jesus says to his disciples, how often he says, "Do not be afraid," he has this genuine care for the people that he's with. Sometimes it looks like he doesn't care and he's just telling them straight. But that's because we've already talked about that already. Sometimes we need to hear hard truths, don't we? Then you get the whole bit where all the disciples, some of the disciples, the sort of bigger discipleship, start falling away. And he says to them, "Do you want to go as well? Do you want to leave as well?" And there's this honesty within the relationship. You don't want to keep on doing something without checking in, saying, "Is this working? How are you? What are you doing?" And then you get the real life aspect of mentoring, where the disciples witness the death of Lazarus and the delayedness of Lazarus, and then the resurrection of Lazarus. And you get this real raw, real life. And I guarantee you, if you pour yourself into mentoring a young person or a leader, and they face a raw, real life situation, they will come to you because you are that safe place. because actually grief is one of the most paralyzing things we know. And actually, if you are that safe space, they can come to you because you're not family. You're not in the sense of you're not that the sort of close first circle. You might be that person they can really just be with. And then we move through almost the last sort of weeks of Jesus' life, and you get those great teaching points of the washing the disciples' feet. So actually, betrayal and denial, and having those hard conversations, getting behind me, Satan. And I did think, you know, friends at Young Life that I know, they say you only people depending on how strong the bridges you've built with them. So if I'm on mentoring week 1 with a young person I don't well, I'm not going to list off all the things they need to sort out in their life because they're going to hell. But actually, if I've been going through someone and I've mentored them for a long chunk of time, we've shared, you can speak into them and say, mate, you need to stop doing that. You need to not do that, because you built that relational bridge. That challenge becomes something that you've got the relational bridge to support the challenge, okay? And then he says, he speaks into them all the time near the end. He says, take heart. He said, peace I leave with you. He has this sense that when there is challenge around, Jesus has this sense that I need to make sure you feel safe here because of what's going on. And they pray together and they have breakfast on the beach, and you get that wonderful redemption. So actually, how do we work through failure with young people? How do we work through when we mess up or they mess up? We don't just want to say, we tried, it didn't work. And so actually, Peter, one of the most powerful things for his future calling was Jesus repeating 3 times, do you love me? Which must have felt one of the most painful things for him to hear. And yet it was the making of him, because Jesus had that safe relationship. He could say, Peter, I've got something for you, but I need to know, do you love me? And then what's really interesting, the whole of John's Gospel, chapter 1, chapter 21, both have the phrase, follow me. So you get follow me at the beginning, and then you get follow me at the end. And it really strikes powerful to me, because I think it says you need to mentor like I mentored. James talked about the Great Commission, and it's so powerful, isn't it? But he's saying to the disciples, follow me at the beginning. Like James said, 3 years together, doing all those crazy bits of ministry. And then he's about to ascend, and he says again, follow me. He says, do, which is why we say to our young people, find someone else to mentor. You know, Matt Summerfield's book, Living Life 1, 2, 3, is really great because it has that simple truth, is that you have one person ahead of you that you're leaning into yourself. You have 2 people either side of you that you're sort of your running mates, your people that you do life with yourself. And then you have 3 people that you're pouring your life into, because it's really key. And that's what he says at the end of John 28. He says, follow me. He says, I want you now to grow the church in the way that I have grown you. And that is such a powerful, powerful image that he has given. There we are, 90 minutes mentoring, and we probably haven't even scratched the surface. Has anyone...
Thanks. I was just going to say, thanks for organising this, Mike. I've got to dash because I've actually got a mentor meeting at past.
Nice.
But yeah, just thanks so much.
Right.
It's been great to be a part of. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I'll allow everyone to go, but do stay in touch, because one of the things that 267 is about, which, you know, the reason, you know, it's great to have Claire and Alex here, is that 267, the sole reason we exist is so that you can succeed and thrive and grow. And so we don't have our own youth group. We don't have our own church, so to speak. We're here to help your ministry. And so 267 is available to you, the whole point of what we do. So we'd love to just have that offer really said loud and clear. We're here for whatever you need. We might not be able to solve it or fix it, but if we can listen to you rant or be that safe place or take you out for dinner, then that is our calling, and we want to do that. And then we're going to carry on creating spaces like this where we can wrestle through a topic, where we can explore what youth ministry and kids ministry looks like. And we're going to only do that more and more as the world opens up, which we're very excited about. So it was great having Becky on. So Becky and I Zoomed just the other week, and we've almost got these sort of middle of England global domination plans just to say, how can we encourage? Because we sort of, if the Venn diagram of Milton Keynes circle and our circle, it just sort of nicely touches. So we're going to say, actually, how can we do more together so that the churches that we have been drawn to can really grow? Because it might not be for all of them that they employ a full-time youth worker. So actually, how do we encourage the church as well as youth leaders? So we're here for you. Drop us an email. And then as soon as it's out, everyone is allowed to come for brunch at the Hatch. Or other establishments are also good, but not quite as good.